My grandfather taught us how to play, everything from war to casino to poker, rummy, gin, backgammon.
We'd go on long trips somewhere, and we'd had that all in the station wagon with, like, one was leaning over the seat, and the other one sitting in the back.
I would sit down with my brothers, we'd play different things on a rainy day and whatnot. And
we played a lot of games for the holidays, pretty much from sort of Thanksgiving to Christmas.
And every time we would go, to be with our grandparents, we'd always play games.
There's still probably a closet full of games at my parents' house.
Yeah, I grew up playing a lot of games as a kid. It was one of the things that we did. Our house, we didn't have a TV. We didn't watch many movies much at all. We read lots of books, but when we wanted to do something as a family, we played board games.
A lot of people who don't play games regularly say, well, I used to do that as a kid, but you still do play games? If you go back 25 years or something like that, 30 years now, I think the markets were very similar. The games that you bought in the United States were the same games that were popular in Europe. And at that time, the publishers in Germany and the press in Germany, they got together and decided to create a jury of people in the press to once a year select the best game that was published in the last year. They call it Spiel des Jahres, which is Game of the Year. And by doing that, it's grown to the point now where the game that wins will be able to sell hundreds of thousands of games within the next year solely because they won the award.
Origins has an Origins Award, which is done by the game industry. The GAMA, which is the Game Manufacturers Association, runs that show and has been giving out the Origins Awards for many, many years. But there's no real national award that has the significance of the SDJ.
By making an award that was worth winning financially, and financially is very important, it's nice to have an award to put on the shelf, but I think by making an award that was worth the money to go for, well, people go for it. And as a result, over the last 30 years, artists got better, publishers got better, so the whole gaming scene, if you want to call it that, in Germany kind of rallied around, and everybody individually and collectively worked very hard to be the one that won the award next year.
So one big difference between the US and the German game market is that newspapers in Germany will run game review columns. They will have people who review games regularly, and therefore the public will know, oh, this game exists, this game exists.
I'll give you the one story. Is we're in the Grand Hotel Esplanade in Berlin, and the press conference was at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. As I came off the elevator, an Associated Press reporter was there. He says, you have to come with me. And I said, well, I have to be over there for the presentation. He says, I have a deadline and I need your pictures of you. And so I was like, nobody was there to tell me what to do. So we actually went outside the hotel, and he took a picture of me with the game in one hand and with an elf doll in the other. This was Elfenland, an elf doll in the other. That picture was in almost every paper in Germany the next day.
Of course, even the games that don't win are better than they were 5, 10, 15 years ago. So I think that's how it happened to be different there, that we didn't have a similar situation in the United States.
I think in America, there is this games are kids stuff, and then there is the hobby market. And the hobby market is these typical students who spend an enormous lot of time on very sophisticated games. But the middle ground, what I call, so to speak, the family, the core, isn't quite there in America.
Myriad Games started in 1999, so this is our 11th year. And so right around then, people that have been in the industry know that that was kind of a big changing point for when games were getting big, board games, specifically board and card games. So you had these kind of three iterations. You had like miniatures games back in the 70s and, you know, what we would call historicals now. So there was that kind of iteration. Then you had role-playing games, you know, also starting in the 70s and going into the 80s and really big in the 80s.
Yeah, you have the Dungeons and Dragons, you have all these things which are very attractive to the people in the teens and 20s, and they have the time for it.
And then into the 90s, now you've got collectible games. You've got Pokemon, which was huge as more of really a collectible phenomenon than a game, but it brought attention to the game.
No surprise that the trading card games, which are relatively complex, happen in America.
I guess it was 1993 or so, there was a game that came out called Magic the Gathering. And you might have heard of that one. So I became kind of a Magic junkie for a couple of years, 93, 94, 95. And then it wasn't until probably 98 that a good friend of mine named Dan Granquist introduced me to a game called Settlers of Catan.
Settlers of Catan, which has been described as cardboard crack.
People that liked games that maybe bought everything that Hasbro released or played some of these war games, or, you know, would find, you know, would get every Avalon Hill game that ever came out. They started hearing about this game in Germany called Settlers of Catan, or Siedler von Catan in German. But it was hard to get a hold of because it was made in Germany. So you had to know a buddy that was in the army, or somebody that traveled for business, or somebody that was coming over for vacation or something for some reason, to go and buy you a copy and mail it back to the US. So copies started sneaking into the United States, and people loved the game.
I think the big breakthrough game was Settlers. You know, when that came through, you know, my eyes were opened. I mean, they were starting to open, and I was just hooked from there.
Settlers of Catan is a game that I've always been amazed by, because it seems like if you teach it to non-gamers, I would think that it would be a little bit too complicated, but it doesn't seem to be.
Looks like you're ready for playing Settlers of Catan. Settlers of Catan. Please don't roll a 7, 'cause if you do, then half my cards are gone.
My name is Klaus Teuber. I'm a game designer, and one of my most famous games is Catan, Settlers of Catan.
So Catan was inspired by, my dad read a lot about Vikings, and also he thought it was very interesting to see that they were not only raiders, but they also were involved in trade.
When I read about the Vikings, when they discovered Iceland, I have a thought, what would happen if some explorers come to an island, there's no one, and what will they do?
If you drew a circle around all of the Azore Islands, you would probably get like what is Catan in his mind, and it's quasi historical in terms that a Viking tribe could have come out and settled on this fictitious island if that in fact, if the Azores were just a little bit more bigger and had more had sheep and all of the Catan resources to offer. So.
And I was reading Games magazine and heard about these games, Settlers of Catan and Carcassonne, and I looked at the games and I thought, they look a little boring, but I guess I'll try them out to see if they're any good or not. They were.
Suddenly we discovered Euro games, and they were wonderful. They were a lot shorter, fun, very interactive.
I remember the first time we played Puerto Rico, and I was just like, I was just like, this game's amazing.
I think the first designer game